On the night of February 19th, 1994, a young woman was rushed into the emergency room at Riverside General Hospital in California. She was barely conscious. Her heart was failing. Her skin was slick with sweat. Doctors moved quickly, slipping into routine. Oxygen, sedatives, defibrillation. Then something went terribly wrong. Doctors and nurses began collapsing. One fainted. Another suffered seizures. A third stopped breathing. The source of the chaos wasn't a gas leak. It wasn't a chemical spill. It was the patient herself. Her name was Gloria Ramirez, and what happened next would become one of the most disturbing and controversial medical mysteries ever documented. A hospital unprepared? Gloria Ramirez was 31 years old, a mother, a woman in the late stages of cervical cancer. That evening, just after 8:15 p.m., she was brought into Riverside General Hospital, suffering from extreme respiratory distress. Her heart was beating too fast for her body to sustain. Her blood pressure was unstable. She was slipping in and out of consciousness. Doctors attempted defibrillation. That's when the room changed. Several staff members noticed a strange smell, described later as fruity, garlicky, and chemical. Then they noticed her skin. It appeared coated in an oily sheen. And when blood was drawn, something even more unsettling appeared. The first warning signs: the blood didn't look normal. It was thick, oily. Floating inside were pale, shimmering particles, almost crystalline, visible under the hospital lights. A nurse drawing the blood complained of dizziness. Moments later, she fainted. Another medical resident became lightheaded, collapsed, and began convulsing. She experienced apnea, periods where her breathing stopped entirely. Within minutes, a respiratory therapist also collapsed, later describing an inability to control her limbs. The emergency room descended into confusion. More than 20 staff members reported symptoms: burning sensations, nausea, shortness of breath, temporary paralysis. Hospital administrators declared an internal emergency. Patients were evacuated into the parking lot, and Gloria Ramirez was left alone in the room. At 8:50 p.m., she was pronounced dead. Fear takes over. Even after Gloria's death, the danger didn't seem to end. Staff members who helped move her body began vomiting and complained of intense burning sensations. Their clothes were removed and sealed in bags. They were treated outside, in the parking lot, out of fear that a toxic chemical was still present. By the end of the night, 23 of 37 emergency room staff had been affected. 5 were hospitalized overnight. Around 11 p.m., a hazardous materials team arrived in full protective suits. They searched the hospital for leaks, spills, or airborne toxins. Nothing was found. The autopsy that raised more questions. 6 days later, Gloria Ramirez's autopsy was performed. Coroners wore airtight protective suits. The examination room was sealed. Blood, tissue, and even air samples from the body bag were collected. Nothing conclusive was discovered. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac dysrhythmia caused by kidney failure related to cervical cancer. But that explanation didn't address what had happened in the emergency room. County officials called it the most baffling death in local history. The media quickly gave it a name: the toxic woman. Theory 1: mass psychogenic illness. The first official explanation came from the California Department of Health and Human Services. Investigators interviewed more than 30 members of the emergency room staff who had been on duty that night. After months of review, they reached a conclusion that stunned many of the people involved: mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. In simple terms, it describes a situation where physical symptoms spread through a group without a detectable environmental or chemical cause. The symptoms are real, the suffering is real, but the trigger is psychological stress rather than poison or exposure. Officials argued that the emergency room that night was a perfect storm for this phenomenon. A young woman is in critical condition, a strange, unfamiliar odor, a high-stress resuscitation attempt. When the first nurse collapsed, fear may have spread faster than any chemical. Investigators noted that ambulance personnel who transported Gloria reported no symptoms at all. They also pointed out that not every affected staff member had direct contact with Gloria's body. Some only entered the room after hearing what had happened. According to the report, the unusual smell acted as a psychological trigger. Once the idea of contamination took hold, physical symptoms followed: dizziness, nausea, shortness of breath. All consistent, they said, with mass psychogenic illness. From an administrative perspective, it was a clean explanation. No unidentified toxin, no unknown chemical threat, no institutional failure. But for the doctors and nurses who collapsed, seized, and stopped breathing, the explanation felt deeply inadequate. Several required extended hospitalization. One staff member spent time in intensive care. Some reported lingering health problems long after the incident. They rejected the idea that fear alone could cause such severe physical reactions. And to this day, many involved insist the experience was not something they imagined. None believed it was all in their heads. Theory 2. A chemical chain reaction. The second major explanation focused not on psychology, but on chemistry, specifically a substance called dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO. At the time, DMSO was sold in Mexico and used by some cancer patients as an alternative pain treatment. It was not approved by the FDA for this purpose in the United States, but it was widely discussed in alternative medicine circles. Gloria Ramirez's family later confirmed that she had been using DMSO to manage pain from her cancer. That detail immediately caught investigators' attention. DMSO has several notable properties. It can produce a strong garlicky or sulfur-like odor. It can leave an oily residue on the skin. And it is easily absorbed through human tissue, entering the bloodstream rapidly. All of these details matched what the emergency room staff reported that night. Scientists from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory were asked to review the evidence. They proposed a step-by-step chemical chain reaction. First, DMSO applied to Gloria's skin may have entered her bloodstream in unusually high concentrations. Second, when Gloria was given supplemental oxygen in the emergency room, the DMSO could have been oxidized into dimethyl sulfone. Dimethyl sulfone is normally harmless, but investigators believed it could explain the strange crystalline particles seen floating in her blood. Then came the most controversial step. During defibrillation, powerful electrical shocks passed through Gloria's body. The theory suggested that these shocks may have converted dimethyl sulfone into dimethyl sulfate. Dimethyl sulfate is extremely toxic. Even brief exposure can cause severe respiratory irritation, neurological damage, paralysis, seizures, symptoms strikingly similar to those experienced by doctors and nurses in the room. On paper, the theory seemed to connect every strange detail: the odor, the oily sheen, the crystalline blood, the sudden collapse of staff. But the scientific community was divided. Critics pointed out that dimethyl sulfate is highly volatile and difficult to form under normal medical conditions. No definitive measurements of dimethyl sulfate were ever taken that night. The Livermore team acknowledged they had not successfully recreated the reaction in a real-world medical setting. Even the lead scientists behind the theory were careful with their language. They did not claim this is what happened, only that it was a possibility worth investigating. Despite these reservations, the coroner's office later described the DMSO chain reaction as the most likely explanation. To this day, it remains the most detailed scientific attempt to explain the incident. But it is still a theory, not a proven conclusion. Theory 3, a hospital with a history. The third theory came not from scientists or state officials, but from Gloria Ramirez's own family. They believed the danger didn't originate from Gloria at all. They believed it came from the hospital. Riverside General Hospital already had a troubling safety record. In 1991, 3 years before Gloria's death, hospital employees had been treated for exposure to leaking sterilizing chemicals. In 1993, just months before Gloria arrived at the emergency room, inspections detected sewer gas in parts of the facility. To the Ramirez family, this history mattered. They questioned whether hazardous conditions already present in the hospital could explain the strange odors, sudden illnesses, and confusion that night. Gloria's sister later stated that she believed her sister might have survived if she had been taken to a different hospital, but the family's concerns went beyond environmental hazards. They pointed to a series of events that raised uncomfortable questions. One of the most critical pieces of evidence, the syringe used to draw Gloria's blood, was accidentally discarded. This was even though staff clothing was treated as hazardous material and sealed in bags. To the family, that inconsistency was impossible to ignore. Then there was the investigation itself. An experienced coroner's investigator assigned to the case died by suicide roughly 1 month into the investigation. County officials later stated she may have been under extreme pressure related to the case. While no direct link was ever established, the timing fueled speculation. Compounding that suspicion were changes in official statements. Early remarks from the coroner's office suggested Gloria may not have died from natural causes. Later conclusions reversed that position. County officials denied any wrongdoing. They maintained that inspections of the emergency room ventilation system found nothing unusual. No toxic leaks, no dangerous gases, and no evidence of a cover-up. But for the Ramirez family, the pattern was clear. A hospital with a known history of safety issues. Key evidence lost. An investigation marked by contradictions. In their view, too many red flags were dismissed. They filed a wrongful death and malpractice lawsuit, insisting the truth had never fully surfaced. The courts eventually closed the case, but doubts lingered. Why the case still haunts medicine. Gloria Ramirez was buried 2 months after her death, but the questions never went away. Was this mass hysteria, a freak chemical reaction, or evidence of deeper institutional failure? No explanation has ever been universally accepted. Hospitals quietly revised chemical exposure protocols. Emergency rooms reconsidered ventilation and staff safety. But the mystery remains. The human cost. Behind the theories is a woman, a mother, a daughter, a patient who went to the hospital for help. She didn't choose to become a mystery. And the people who tried to save her didn't choose to become victims. Closing. The unanswered question. So, what really happened in that emergency room in Riverside? A rare convergence of chemistry and circumstance? A tragedy explained away too easily? Or something modern medicine still cannot fully understand? More than 30 years later, the case of Gloria Ramirez remains unresolved, and her final moments continue to haunt science. Because if it happened once, could it happen again?